Hello and welcome to our Analytics Breakthrough webinar series. Glad you can join us. We have Chris Goward with us today. We're really excited about this discussion about testing and optimization. With you here, Faris Al-Halou, co-founder and principal consultant at Enor, and also my colleague Eric Fettman, who is a co-author of our book and our senior analytics trainer and coach at Enor. I think folks who are in the testing and optimization space know Chris very well, but we'll give a quick introduction. Chris is a very well-known speaker throughout, actually not just in the US, but globally. He's spoken at over 200 conferences. He's a very interactive speaker, very engaging speaker. I had the pleasure of co-present with him at an SMX conference a couple of years ago. But in addition to speaking engagements and him, Chris is an author. His book is You Should Test That. I think everyone should have a copy of that book. And he is he is a co-founder of Wider Funnel. When Fortune 500 companies, again in North America and globally, when they are looking for an expert on testing optimization, Chris is the person to go to. Chris and his colleagues at Wider Funnel have developed the lift model and for conversion optimization strategies, and we will know more about that during this webinar. So thank you, Chris, for being with us today, and thank you for your contribution to the book.
Thank you for the invitation, Faris, to both contribute to the book and today to speak with you. It's always great to talk to like-minded, smart people doing some great work in the space, so looking forward to it.
Thank you. Eric?
Thank you, Faris, for the introduction, and thank you, Chris, for joining us today on our webinar and for your great contribution to the book. If you have questions for Chris during the webinar, please enter them in the question panel in GoToWebinar, and we will be happy to field those questions live. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started with our discussion. Chris's contribution to the book, and also importantly, I think of an important point in his own book, You Should Test That, is the lift model. And I think many of us who are in the analytics and optimization space, or those of us who are primarily in analytics but want to bring in more qualitative and conceptual inputs into our optimization practices, are looking for good models that we can marry with the data, that allow us to back up from the data and say, okay, what are we really trying to do here before we even look at the numbers, before we even get into analytics, before we even get into testing. So the lift model is very compelling. And Chris, could you just tell us a little bit about the lift model, how it was generated, how it has evolved?
Yeah, so you're right. At Wider Funnel, we focus on conversion optimization as a practice, and have since I started the company in 2007, really been focusing on optimizing the process of optimization. And analytics is a component of it, but really you're correct. There are a lot of qualitative, conceptual, persuasional factors that happen in sort of cooperation with the analytics and the data. The lift model was one of the frameworks that we developed to answer a question, and we've got a bunch of frameworks that we've released and produced over time, all with the intention of answering an important optimization question that all companies face. And the lift model was intended to answer the question, what are the barriers to conversion on this experience that I'm looking at? So what are the problems facing a potential prospect or customer? And so we looked at all of the tests we've been running and various frameworks and concepts that existed and known marketing principles, and really wanted to make something that was useful for an optimization strategist to be able to look at an experience and identify and categorize all of the potential barriers to conversion from the customer's perspective. And so what it does is it identifies the 6 conversion factors, the types of conversion barriers that are affecting every website's conversion rate right now. And it allows an optimization strategist to put themselves in the shoes of the prospect, of the prospective customer or the shopper, and view it through that lens to understand their barriers. So it looks at the value proposition as the first one, the clarity, relevance, anxiety, distraction, and urgency. And within each of those categories can identify barriers and then look for where the soft spots are by testing and validating that those are actually barriers.
So Chris, when you're working with clients, or when you're advising in general, what's an effective way for a company to actually implement the lift model when they're approaching optimization?
Yeah, so when I first developed the lift model, it was early days of wider funnel, and it's evolved since then to include many sub-factors, but still, the main categories hold true. That was really the only framework we had to work with. At the time, we were looking at landing pages and single-page experiences, or touch points, and trying to look for problems to test improvements on. But since then, it's really evolved much more broadly, and the lift model now sits within a larger framework called the infinity optimization process, which pulls in various aspects. So another framework that's become really popular is the PI framework, which answers the question, where should I focus my energy first? Like what's the most important problem to solve in my customer journey? And it prioritizes all of the customer touch points based on their potential for improvement, the importance of the touch point to the business, and the ease of running experiments or making improvements. So potential importance and ease is PI, and that's how the PI framework developed. But there are a lot of other methods and tools and techniques that can contribute data and information to understand the customer's perspective and come up with better solutions to improve their marketing.
And value proposition being at the center of the lift model, do you consistently or often observe the biggest lifts in conversion with stronger value propositions?
Well, you know what? There's a reason that the value proposition is at the core of the lift model. It is the most important factor. If the value proposition is weak, then there's only so much potential improvement you can make. A lot of people in conversion optimization are still focused on small details, on the minutia surrounding the real message, right? They're thinking about buttons.
Right.
What color button should I test is still one of the most common questions I get, even though it's really not that relevant. But if you can test actual changes in value proposition, that's really the core of your offering. And that's, I think, where the biggest potential and missed opportunity often in conversion optimization is actually defining what is your value proposition as a business or as a product or as a brand. And you can test and really understand what value proposition positionings or aspects can have the best effect and are most motivational, and then roll that insight out into all of your marketing approaches. We're often seeing that is the case, and so it's not only getting some of the biggest lift in conversion rate on a page or an experience, but actually impacting the marketing strategy.
I think value proposition is one of those things that's very simple and very complex at the same time. And in your experience, do organizations, do they understand their own value proposition, but just not articulate it effectively, or is there sometimes even an understanding gap where company is going along and it's profitable, but there hasn't really been a clear value proposition about, what are we about and what do we do better than anyone else?
Yeah, and different companies are in different situations with respect to that. And often what's happening is we see a lot of companies basically over-communicating because they don't understand what's the real value proposition for their most valuable segments. And so they'll communicate all types of value proposition positionings or components of value propositions, and basically numb the prospective buyer into buying. But somewhere in that whole mass of content, they'll find one nugget of information that's really the most important value proposition, and luckily they'll have found it in this mass of other irrelevant content. And so what's really an interesting opportunity is by identifying the core value proposition that's relevant, you can be much more laser focused in messaging and much more effective because there isn't sort of the problem of the signal to noise ratio being blurred.
Interesting. So often value propositions aren't focused enough.
Right, and I go back to an analogy sometimes or an example I see that often happens when you come across a very long page of marketing content, and there's a bunch of really pretty marketing words and fluff, and they'll say a whole bunch of features of the product, and they'll talk about the benefits and all of these things, and then you'll get to the very bottom of the page, and there will be one sentence right above the footer, almost at the bottom, where they will have run out of words finally and just say what they mean. And then often that sentence can be a core insight and a powerful value proposition that we can we'll often just take that very last sentence of the page, make it a headline, and see if people will respond better to that because they've finally said what they mean.
Right.
So marketers sometimes confuse themselves by overthinking and over-embellishing what they're actually maybe a very simple message.
Thanks, Chris. This is fair. I just shifting gears a little bit, and I want to remind our attendees that you're welcome to ask your questions. We'll have those questions presented and answered at the end of the webinar. But Chris, in terms of more on the practical side of things, and say I'm in charge of optimization at company X, and I either have a program that's sort of maybe stale, or I'm just new to optimization. How do people get started? What are your maybe tips on getting people motivated to do testing? I know you can quote, we can quote case studies and numbers and percent improvements, but what are the sort of practical steps that you might have? You might have to share with someone who's just either trying to improve their existing optimization process or start a new one.
Yeah, so there are several, I think, important components of any good optimization program, and depending on what a company already has in place, they might need to focus on one or the other. As foundationally, the companies that get the best results have a great process to get reliable results. And I start with process because we've seen so often that companies that start just with ad hoc testing, or even without testing, just making improvements to think they're optimizing using a before and after method, run out of steam very quickly and run out of energy and motivation and ideas, and then quickly burn their organizational support. And that's one of their most valuable assets, because there's going to be times in any optimization program where you go through a dry patch, where you're doing a lot of testing and not getting the big wins that get celebrated. And in order to go through those patches and build on the insights that you're gathering in that time, and then eventually reap the rewards that happen, you've got to have enough momentum and support to carry you through. And so that happens by really understanding and knowing that the process you're running will deliver results. So, again, we focused a lot of our energy, I have, in my optimization career, on building that process. And I think there are a few critical components to it so that you never run out of ideas. And so there are areas within idea generation that if you spend energy on those things, you can have a long list of ideas. You need testing to validate that those ideas are actually true and you're not and you have reliable results. You've got to make sure in the nuts and bolts that the tracking is actually measuring revenue lift and not just sort of false indicators. I've got to make sure the tracking is done properly, and and of course I'm speaking to the choir here with you guys. I know you spend a lot of your energy on making sure that the analytics and data and tracking is done properly, so you know how important that is. And there's a lot of sort of devil in the details issues with optimization. It's a complex practice, and it takes generally a lot of involvement from different areas of the organization, from IT and brand and web design and product management and content creation, and everyone has to agree and be on the same page. And so that's why the process can really synchronize efforts and make sure everyone's focused on the right things. So, so we recently published Infinity Optimization Process, and people can find it online and take whatever components they want out of it and adapt it to suit themselves if it helps them get a starting point. But in that, I outline what I think are the important factors in the right process. Having the process support both an exploratory mindset, which is an expansive mindset and looking for opportunities, and also a reductive mindset, which is a totally different process of validating whether those long list of ideas are actually actionable and accurate. And those things need to live separately, but work together to get growth and insights.
Thank you.
Chris, and we'll make sure to include a link to the Infinity Optimization process in the follow-up that we will send out, and I'm certainly very interested in checking that out myself. Chris, if we could if we could go back for a minute to the value proposition, and if we could look at, I think this is especially compelling. I think a lot of some of these concepts that are so elegant just kind of hover, and they're never articulated, but I think this is an important concept that's articulated here. Could we talk a little bit about points of difference and the relation to value proposition?
Right. Yeah. So one of the frameworks that we mentioned in the book, in your book, is this PODS, POPs, and POIs framework, which is a tool for understanding value proposition and coming up with ideas for value proposition positioning or approaches to test. So the idea is that it's like a Venn diagram where you've got what your customers want. There's this whole area of what your customers want. There's an area of what your competition offers, and there's an area of what you're able to offer in your product or your brand. And there are overlaps between each of those three things. And if you think about the center of this Venn diagram, where you've got the overlap where there's some things that the customers want, that your competitors offer, and you offer, most marketers focus a lot of their energy in that central point. And it's sort of the Me Too area where everyone's out there advertising. We've got great service, we've got great products, great quality, free shipping, and everyone's out there yelling the same thing to the same audience. And that's what can be called the red ocean, right? It's just a bunch of bloody fish out there fighting over the same prey, and it's ineffective. What's more effective is to look at what your customers want, and that overlaps with what you offer, and that none of your competitors can offer that. Those are your points of difference. Whereas the central point are your POPs. Those are your points of parity, where you're just like everyone else. But your points of difference are your unique value proposition points from your customer's perspective that are important to them and also important to your product. And the only way you know what's in those areas is by analyzing, what are your customers looking for through research or through testing, identifying what your competition does and what you do. It simply can be a 3-column chart, and you can just brainstorm and go through all those things. You'll probably come up with a few different overlaps where you're doing something that your customers want, no one else is doing it. Now those become ideas that you can test that could become really powerful value proposition insights. And the best place to validate those is on landing pages, because they're new visitors arriving on your website that haven't been sort of inoculated to your message by seeing all of the other messages that you have on your website already. And so by creating different landing page versions with those different value proposition approaches, you can find out which ones have the most motivational value behind them, which ones get the highest conversion rate, and then those may be insights that you can then feed into your marketing, like I mentioned before. So it's a useful exercise to workshop with an organization, going through the pods, pops, and poise. We've done it internally at Wider Funnel with our team, and we do it with clients, of course. And it's fairly simple conceptually, and it really helps to get a cross-functional team in the room to do that brainstorming and get different perspectives.
Chris, how important do you think it is, also you mentioned customer input, how important do you think it is when you're generating ideas for, or you're refining your value proposition, or maybe generating ideas for your value proposition, how important is it to either speak directly to customers or do some kind of online usability testing or in-person usability testing? I know that's the usability testing is a little not necessarily directly related to value proposition, but how important is it to talk to people who are known customers or potential customers when you are trying to refine your value proposition?
Yeah, it's a very important part of understanding your customer's mindset, which ultimately is the whole point of value proposition optimization, really understanding how they're viewing your message. And so getting the real voice of the customer happens by getting right in front of them, hearing how they refer to your product. Because you'll find when you look at user testing results or surveys, satisfaction surveys or customer questions, that they'll use different words than the marketers, because they might not be as technically accurate, or they might not be exactly how you want to position yourselves, but that's how they think about your product, and it's the need that it's solving. So it can really open your mind to trying different approaches and trying different messages and really speaking in a way that relates to them. And so one of the best tools that we love to use is the Net Promoter Score surveys, where a lot of companies have jumped on board with this idea of following up with customers and asking them just a couple simple questions to understand their perspective on the product and what they recommend it, how satisfied they are, and just free-form comments in there. We'll mine those things for patterns and for different approaches. But also user testing is very valuable. And there are a lot of tools as well on more of the quantitative side that people have really aren't taking advantage of. Scroll maps and click heat maps and eye tracking heat maps. Some people, when they don't understand how to use them, they can just brush them off as just management eye candy. But there can really be some gold in there when you look at the patterns of the eye flow and where people are attracted and what are the most important elements on marketing touch points and pages that could lead to hypotheses for testing. Sometimes not necessarily related so much to value proposition, but sometimes they are.
Right. Yeah, we found too that the heat mapping can be heat mapping scroll depth can be very useful and sometimes show you things that you are not tracking in analytics, because analytics won't track actions that you haven't implemented for tracking, and sometimes the heat mapping tools can fill in some of those gaps, sometimes in very surprising and valuable ways. And Chris, do you want to just talk a little bit about this interesting test that we have in the book?
Right. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about. There's an example. Oh, this was the International Rescue Committee test, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, this is a very interesting test, and there's a lot of detail to this one. But really, what's cool in this is what we found was looking at the. So we actually set up as a background. We set up an A/B test after analyzing this landing page, and it was for the International Rescue Committee, which is a very well-known disaster relief organization, and they had a limited time frame to increase their donation value in the end of the year tax donation season, and so we ran an analysis of the test with our strategists, and using the LIFT model identified a whole bunch of conversion barriers that then led to hypotheses to test. But we didn't have very much time and limited traffic to try to get, so we really were oriented towards getting quick big wins that could then be used throughout the donation season. So we ran 3 different variations that were dramatically different, and we were testing the overall approach to how much content, to answer the question, how much content is needed to persuade visitors on this landing page to make a donation. So did they need the story of the International Rescue Committee? It's a really great organization. It was founded at the request of Albert Einstein, and they do great work. They have very efficient use of their budget, helping a lot of people. So do they need that story, or do they just need dollar amounts with high-value anchors focused on the donation just because people just want a tax receipt, or is there somewhere in between that they need to focus? So we ran variations to test that question by isolating those different approaches. Well, so we ran the test and we came out with an answer, and it was really cool. We were nearly complete. We had statistical significance. We were about to turn off the test, and then a typhoon hit in the South Pacific. And so what was interesting is that our strategists then were looking at the test results the next day, and something was shifting. So we had lost statistical significance, and one of the winning variations now was dropping like a rock in the reports. And so we kept it running for a little while longer and thought that we had an inconclusive test, and it was really, we're struggling with this. And then so we dug into the segmentation and looked at all of the different visitor segments and the source segments, and then found that different variations were performing differently for different segments, as well as with different senses of urgencies, external urgency. And so we know urgency is one of the 6 conversion factors, and what we found in this test is that the external urgency that was pushing people before this typhoon hit, there was no external urgency because it's disaster relief, but there wasn't really a situation in current events that was causing it. After the typhoon, everyone was motivated to donate, and so it turns out that they needed less content on the landing page. In fact, the page that started with more of the story was dramatically hurting their revenue. And not only that, but we then looked in the segments and found that people who already knew about the brand, who came in from the search segment, which was primarily brand search terms, also didn't perform as well with the greater content page. But in low urgency periods, in non-search segments, that worked much better, like to the tune of 40% higher revenue. And so they've gotten an insight from that about the types of messages they have to go out with in different high urgency and low urgency periods and for different segments to meet the needs of how much content and persuasion they need about the value proposition to convert.
Right, and you know what, Chris, there's a test that I actually did myself in a previous life at one point with a guarantee seal, and you were always kind of encouraged to test out what are they called? Not legitimacy badges. There's some kind of validation badges. What's that?
Like credibility indicators?
Yeah, credibility indicators. And interestingly, in the main segment on the website, there was an 11% conversion increase, but on a segment that was referred to by a partner, where the partner was already, it was a nationally known organization and the partner had already validated the company. The guarantee was actually hurting it. It hurt conversions by 5%. So it actually degraded the value proposition, so to speak, because I think the psychology was people were saying, well, I already know that you're a worthwhile company because this other organization told me so. So why are you putting this guarantee in front of me? So the testing itself is interesting, but also the response of different segments is something that, as you say, folks should keep in mind.
Right. Yeah, very related. Yep.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Eric. It is, we're coming up on time here, and we want to, again, thank all of our attendees. We want to let you know that the recording of this webinar will be available on the Enor blog. We want to, again, thank Chris. You can reach him at www.widerfunnel.com/blog or email at iwant@widerfunnel.com. I love that email. Or on his Twitter account, twitter.com/Chris Goward. And go ahead and go on Amazon and get a copy of his book. You should test that, or you can check out his website. You should test that.com. As we mentioned briefly, previously, if you want to get more information about our GA Breakthrough book, or get a recording and share this recording with some of your colleagues, check out our blog. In a couple of days, we should have the recording up and running. Again, Chris, we thank you so much for taking the time to first contribute to the book and second to be on this webinar. And we look forward to seeing you at a conference probably after the holidays.
That sounds great. Well, thank you again, Ferris and Eric. It's always great chatting with you.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's very interesting. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Bye.